we're going to talk about why you need to write your garden plans down. My background is in science. I'm a scientist. I like to keep track of things. I like to take data and see how things progress. That's just me. There's a lot of people out there that sit there and sling seeds in the ground and hope for the best, and that method works for them too. But especially when you're starting out, I think it's really important to try to track even a little bit, even if that's not your style all the way, what you're planting and when and how you want to lay out your beds, because otherwise you're going to have lower yield, you're going to replant varieties that don't thrive in your area and all of that. So it kind of helps in that learning curve process of things. So even if you just do it for 2 seasons, give it a shot, and I really think it's going to help increase the productivity of your garden. It's really important to always sketch out or write down your plans for the garden. So one thing is diversity, yes, but also figuring out how to succession plant. Not everything goes into the ground at once, and if you plant everything that's in season for right then, you're going to have no space left to plant in another month or 2 months down the line while everything's still producing, but you want to pop something else into the garden. So if you take the time, which for me is fun, it's sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee in the morning and letting my mind drift and think about the garden and what I want to do with it, writing down all of the crops that I want to include, factoring in the space that they need, and considering what time they need to be planted. I put that all into a little sketch of the garden, and it helps me keep track of what my intentions were so that I don't get a little overzealous, which I sometimes happen to do. My husband always gives me crap because I plant too many plants in one bed and then I have no room to plant the next crop. So since I started doing this, it helps me stay focused and keep the functionality of the garden as best as possible so that I can maximize my productivity out of the beds. This is a very general and very rough sketch of my garden and how it's all laid out. So I laid out the beds the same direction and how many number of beds that I have, and then from there I fill in what I want to plant for the season. So whether it be peppers, okra, and eggplant, or amaranth and tomatoes, those pair well together, FYI. I have my marigolds intermixed with my tomatoes. I keep track of my bush beans and which varieties they are, whether it's the Dixie speckled or the Romano bush bean, and it just helps me plan so that I make sure that I get all of the different varieties in that I want to for the season. This is north, this is south. In this garden plan that I have here, the beds that I'm working with in this garden, there's a huge banyan tree down south, and that's where the sun's coming from. So I know that these beds down here get more shade and these ones get more sun. I also know that the sun, it gets more sun exposure in the afternoon coming from the west. So I laid out my beds accordingly. So these varieties need less light. These varieties need more light. And by planning it out ahead of time, I'm not just shooting around in the dark. This is moving into a new season. The beds right now are planted with a lot of leafy greens from the winter, but I know that I want to get my tomatoes in here. Eventually I'll be planting okra and amaranth. And then like up here, the kale's going to last pretty long into the season, so I went ahead and left that in the garden plan for that bed. But I'm going to be planting eggplant, okra, and peppers behind it. So you can see here, the kale is still in place, and then behind that, I'm going to start planting in my eggplant, okra, and peppers. Right here, I wrote down not only whether I wanted to plant sweet potatoes or tomatoes, I also wrote down the varieties. Once they start producing, or a little ways down the road, if a pest annihilates some of my green vernissage tomatoes, but the black vernissage tomatoes seem to hold up way better against the pests or the rain or whatever the case may be, then I know next season, don't bother with the green cherry tomatoes, just do the black cherry tomatoes. And if you do this over time, you'll start to pick out differences that you may have overlooked otherwise, and it'll kind of remind you that this one didn't produce very much or very well, or it did but only until June, whereas the other stuff lasted until July. So maybe you plant the ones that petered out in June a little bit earlier than the ones you planted in July. It's just some things to think about. I know it's kind of a little bit here, a little bit there, pretty theoretical, but writing it down will help you process all of the data that your garden is feeding back to you. Let me know if you are going to use a journal the next time you plan out your garden. I want to hear about your successes and the way you track it. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the little bell next to it so you're alerted every time new videos come out. Happy gardening!